Let's take a look at some interesting Airbnb data. Emily, what do you got for us?
I was going to say, Krystal, this is your hobby horse, and actually, this data shows exactly why that it's a good hobby horse to have right now because it's extremely consequential, and the ripple effect of what's happening in real estate is going to start to play a huge role in our economy. I mean, it already is, but what we're going to see sort of downstream of the bigger picture questions. We can go ahead and put the first element up on the screen. This is new data about Airbnb. Look, this is from Nick Gurley. He says the Airbnb collapse is real. And if you look at this chart on the screen, that could not be more true. Revenues are down nearly 50% in cities like Phoenix and Austin. Nick continues, watch out for a wave of forced selling from Airbnb owners later this year in the areas hit hardest by the revenue collapse. And those areas, Tennessee, Phoenix, Austin, Myrtle Beach, San Antonio, Asheville, Salisbury, Maryland. That one I found a little random, but I guess it's the Eastern Shore. Nashville, Denver, Breckenridge, New Orleans, a lot of vacation destinations, Lakeland, Florida, Seattle, Washington, Panama City, Florida, and Orlando, Florida. We can go ahead and put the next element up on the screen as well. Nick continues to parse the data. And he says here, what's scary for the U.S. housing market is just how many Airbnbs there are. Data from All the Rooms shows 1 million Airbnb/VRBO rentals compared to only 570,000 homes for sale. A million rental properties compared to, roughly half of that homes for sale creates huge home prices downside if struggling Airbnb owners elect to sell. Huge home price downside if struggling Airbnb owners elect to sell. I mean, just think about what that looks like if you start to have these huge crashes in particular markets, and it will be a little bit uneven. I mean, I think there are a lot of places that weren't up on that first chart we were talking about where you're seeing particularly the South seems to be getting hit really just smacked by this, where you're not seeing similar things for other huge Airbnb markets. New York, Washington, D.C. actually weren't on that list. And Krystal, I want to ask you what that means in terms of how the country experiences the sort of downstream effects of a crash in particular markets.
I mean, it's complicated, honestly, because there are a lot of people hoping that housing prices crash, that we're sort of hoping that we might have a downturn in the housing market, because between the fact that housing prices have come down a tiny bit, but you have mortgage interest rates so much higher, it has made it so that it is this is the most unaffordable time in history to try to actually purchase a home. So there are a lot of people who are not on the housing ladder, haven't been able to purchase a home, who will be out there going, yes, baby, come down prices, please. Because for God's sake, they just seem to go up and up and up and become wildly unobtainable for anyone with just a normal middle class income. So there's that aspect of it. There's the Airbnb specific part of this, which I think is pretty interesting. Airbnb really skyrocketed like a lot of companies during the pandemic because you have people working from home. White collar professionals who had some money to burn. They were like, you know what? If I'm just working from home, that could be anywhere. So why don't I, go somewhere beautiful and rent an Airbnb for a month or a week or whatever.
And lease my own place or rent my own place on Airbnb.
I could do that too. And you had in certain, especially certain vacation towns, there was a place in upstate New York, actually, I was talking to a cab driver there, that they had seen this huge influx of Airbnb people, and all of the properties were being bought up to be rented out as Airbnbs. You've also seen, and I don't know the specific numbers on this is kind of anecdotal, but I'm pretty confident this is the case. You've seen a real shift from originally Airbnb was just one random person, and they had a vacation property that when they're not using it, they want to rent it out, et cetera, and they use Airbnb. Okay. Now it seems to have become very corporatized, where more likely than not, if you're renting an Airbnb, it's part of some property group and they manage a bunch of properties. And that has made the experience more transactional, and I think in a lot of cases less pleasant. In my personal anecdotal experience, because a lot of times if we're going to go out of town because I have a family, we'll rent an Airbnb because you got more space. I like to have a kitchen, et cetera. It has lowered the quality of the experience because you have all these like crazy rules that they put into place. They're more likely to try to rig the system with like photos that are wildly unrepresentative of what the property actually looks like. So I think there's been a degrading of quality as Airbnb has become this mainstream juggernaut. And then, obviously post-pandemic, there's a real lessening of demand because not everyone went back to the office that was a white-collar worker, but you did have a high percentage go back to the office or working remote, only like once or twice a week, which means that you can't just take off for wherever, whenever you want to. So that has obviously led to this downturn. And I think the ones that'll be offloaded are probably the ones that are run by these larger property companies. Because if you're a person who just has like a vacation home and this is just a way to make some side cash on it, you were probably able to sustain before you were getting all the Airbnb income. And so you may, be more likely to try to hang on to it. But I think for people who got in because they saw a quick cash opportunity, you'll probably see a lot getting dumped on the market.
And also property investment, this has basically been a small business and a huge nest egg for a lot of families. It's not, and I agree, it has been corporatized, it's been bought up. You tend to see like big chains owning tons of properties now. There is a portion, as you mentioned, of the Airbnb population where people were really sustaining themselves by renting, their English basement in a city like Washington, D.C.
Yeah, true.
And that was a huge part of how they were paying their mortgage. And when the sort of foot traffic stops, it's easy to like Monday morning quarterback this, but I really have always thought that Airbnb was a bad investment because unlike Uber, although Uber, you saw the same thing. I mean, with cab drivers who are super powerful lobby and the unions are very powerful, Uber really ended up getting off the ground, although it did have like fits and starts in places like New York or places like California, and is still facing regulation in those places. It was just very obvious to me that I think it was like 2017. I was in Lisbon, and there was anti-Airbnb graffiti on the walls of like different buildings because it's so disruptive.
Yeah,
it's so disruptive, and not in a way that is sort of universally good. Like there were just so many upsides to Uber. With Airbnb, there are really different. I mean, it's a very hard thing for Airbnb even to manage itself, and I think it's been great for a lot of families and people who are able to use it, but on the regulatory level, I knew that it was going to end up becoming way more complicated because a lot of places people just can't resist regulating things to death. But maybe we disagree on that part.
Yeah, well, we definitely disagree on that part with regard to Uber because Uber's whole business model relies on basically like labor exploitation. So if your business model depends on like breaking labor law, then I think you got a problem with your business model. With regard to Airbnbs. Yeah, I mean, this is kind of like, it's a classic, almost like YIMBY debate or NIMBY debate.
It is.
Because it's one thing if you're in a high tourist area where all the houses are basically rental houses anyway, that's one thing. It's another thing when you've got like, a local community where used to everybody being rooted, and now you've got this cycle of young partiers or whoever coming in and out of some of the houses on your street. There's going to be a different level of attention paid to that, I suppose. I saw this article about how apparently there are these apps where you can rent out your pool if you have your own pool in your backyard. Are you aware of this?
I've heard of that. People also do it with cars now. There's apps for just your car.
Oh, really?
People could just come into your driveway and rent your car and go bring it back.
That's interesting. I don't mind. I don't hate that one. But yeah, people were, I guess, in these like, nice neighborhoods, they were upset by the fact that you had all this traffic now coming in to frequent these pools. And there's a big debate going on in Montgomery County, Maryland, about whether or not this should be regulated and where are the boundaries between like maintaining the peace in these neighborhoods and letting people do what they want with their private property. So anyway.
I mean, legitimate question. And that's one of these things that really dogs Airbnb, in that like you do have communities that are uprooted by people who don't give a damn about the neighborhood because they're staying there for a couple days. And, they move on after a couple of days. So if they're really loud for a couple of days.
They don't care about the property. They don't care about the neighborhood.
Yeah, it doesn't matter that they're embarrassed in front of their neighbors or that their neighbors are upset because they'll never see those people again in their lives.
Yeah.
And so it's just, it is very disruptive. But on that note, so like it was clear that there was a real sugar high during the pandemic with Airbnb and even a little bit before the pandemic.
True.
So, and some of the coming down is going to be good because it means there will be what we could agree on as reasonable regulations, even with Uber. But on the other hand, I think some of it might be a little heavy-handed. That said, it really is going to suck for people who build small businesses on the back of this company that was offering something really cool.
No, I actually agree with that. I do agree with that. Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.